The US and Russian ambassadors locking horns at the UN over the Ukraine crisis. Despite a truce holding, the American envoy accuses Moscow of violating the peace deal. Political parties in Denmark call for controversial cartoons of the Prophet Mohammed to all be a part of the school curriculum. Plus, Bitcoin steals the show in Berlin, where a conference dedicated to digital currencies looks at how crypto money could benefit a lot of people in a time of financial uncertainty. It's midday on Saturday here in Moscow. Thanks for joining us on RT International. The entire news team has been putting together the top worldwide headlines. The Russian and US ambassadors to the UN engaged in a fresh battle of words at a Security Council meeting. Washington's envoy came out swinging against Moscow over violations of the peace deal in Ukraine, despite the truce largely holding.
2 days ago, Russia sent its 17th so-called humanitarian convoy into Ukraine, once again denying international observers and Ukrainian border guards the right to conduct a full and complete inspection of its contents.
The last convoy, as well as previous ones, have been thoroughly checked by Ukrainian customs and border control officers at the Donetsk checkpoint. US Ambassador Power, I'd like to ask you to find out what the American embassies are doing in Moscow and Kiev and why they continue to provide you with cheap disinformation instead of these simple facts.
Bit of a heated conversation there at the Security Council in New York. Meantime, across the Atlantic, the UK has warned it's ready to bring sanctions against Russia to a whole different level. However, despite the UK's hawkish approach, the EU is not currently considering further restrictions. The EU foreign ministers are debating their policy on Ukraine at a current informal summit in Latvia. So RT's Gaine Chichikan looks at the differences between the allies in the US and Europe.
The UK and the US threaten more sanctions against Russia if the Minsk peace agreement fails.
We have already begun this week intensive consultations with our European partners on further sanctions pressure.
The UK's David Cameron said the West must be prepared to, quote, settle in for a long and determined position against Russia. The UK is preparing to send instructors to train Ukrainian troops. The US has already done that. President Obama has not decided to send weapons, but U.S. lawmakers left and right are pushing for it. They're pushing for it now, when violence in Ukraine has finally subsided and everyone agrees that the peace deal is working.
I think the strongest thing that we can do now is to provide Kyiv with defensive lethal weapons.
Such lethal aid would have an effect on the battlefield, but also a political effect.
In the meantime, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Greece are speaking with a different voice. They say this is not the time to send weapons to Ukraine and that new sanctions against Russia is not what they're focused on. Germany says they're trying to make the peace deal work. That is the issue in the foreground and not the question if there will be new sanctions. France says it's for de-escalation of the conflict and against sending military instructors and weapons to Ukraine. High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs has slammed the suggestions made by the U.S. to send weapons to arm the Ukrainian military. I'm joined by Brian Becker from the Answer Coalition. In your view, is this a good cop, bad cop tactic between the U.S. and the U.K. on the one side and these other European powers on the other? Or do you think there is a real difference in strategy and objectives in Ukraine?
I think we're seeing a real divergence, not just a good cop, bad cop scenario being played out against Russia. There's a divergence of interest because the United States is trying to impose new economic sanctions that hurt not only Russia, but also its European trading partners. The United States is far away and can, watch others fight, can have a good political outcome, they hope, but they're not really suffering. So, of course, the European countries are having experienced World War I, having experienced World War II, very, very worried, rightfully so, about the beginning of a regional conflict or a local conflict developing into a continent-wide or even a global conflict because the Europeans have experienced it, they've suffered it. It's easy for American politicians to talk about war and to be tough and new sanctions and send weapons. For the European powers, they know where that road leads.
Thank you, sir. Brian Becker with me in Washington. I'm Ganesh Chekyan, RT.
Of course, here on RT International, we're closely following the situation in East Ukraine, observing the tentative truce. Now where the returning of the bodies of dead soldiers to their families is now proving a hurdle. That story with artist Murat Gazdiev coming up. For now, a Danish teaching association wants controversial cartoons of the Prophet Mohammed to be included in school textbooks. The idea is supported by two conservative opposition parties. An immigration spokesperson for the right-wing People's Party went as far as saying it should be obligatory because of the challenges posed by Islam and the pressure on basic freedoms. Other supporters insisted that Charlie Hebdo killings and recent terror attacks in Copenhagen are an important part of history and should not be ignored.
My initiative is about securing that the Muhammad crisis, which took place in 2005, is actually being debated in the Danish public schools. And in Denmark, we have this list of, you may call them events, or events that have taken place in the history and that meant a change to Denmark. And I really believe strongly that the Muhammad crisis did change a lot of the history in Denmark, and therefore I have suggested that the Muhammad crisis is coming on that list so that the Danish pupils will be educated also in the Muhammad crisis here in Denmark.
Last month, a Danish cafe hosting a Swedish cartoonist known for his images of the Prophet Mohammed was the scene of a shooting that left one dead. And that was just weeks after a murderous rampage at the offices of the satirical French newspaper Charlie Hebdo in Paris, a publication known for its own scandalous depictions of religious figures. During that event, 12 people were killed. The chairman of the Danish Islamic Center, Fatih Alev, he says publishing the images despite knowing they will offend ultimately amounts to bullying.
I disagree that the cartoons are necessary in the school books, because in any pupil, any student who is curious about what these cartoons are about can find them at Google and on the internet. I believe that some of the Muslim students probably will be offended by these drawings, and this is something that, I mean, we don't need to do. A school is not a place where students and parents and teachers should involve themselves in an ideological fight. So this is very obviously an attempt to create a debate in Denmark so that they can gain some more votes before the election campaign start. The election campaign will be starting very soon in Denmark.
Lots still to come here on RT International, including if you're lazy, then this revolutionary new paint is just for you. It can repel any dirt, oil, ink, booze. Scientists compare it to a mini vacuum cleaner that could make wash days a thing of the past. You can stick around to find out more on that. Also, we take a look at how a rapidly expanding coal mine in a remote part of Australia is forcing people from their homes, with the local authorities, taking sides with the mine officials. Details on the way.
It's getting cold out there. Brr.
Cold War, Cold War, Cold War.
New ice age in relations with the West.
We will have a relationship. The question is, what kind of relationship?
Maybe the kind of relationship where Russia is the threat and NATO is the peacemaker.
Russia's provocations, Russia's aggression.
Bloody Russians, they keep moving their country closer to our bases.
There you go, totally clear why Russia would be blamed.